One of the really nice things about the ESP32 is that it works with the Arduino IDE. Not only that, but because of the support that the manufacturer has implemented for the Arduino platform, we can use a lot of the existing Arduino libraries and infrastructure and hardware. That means that we can reuse what we already know in our work with the Arduino and the Arduino Uno in particular with the ESP32, and use all of the additional hardware capabilities that the ESP32 brings along. And the first thing that we need to do in order to be able to do such work is to install the ESP32 support for the Arduino IDE. And that's what we do in this lecture. I'll show you how to provide the ESP32 support for the Arduino IDE first on the Mac, and then in the next lecture in Windows. In both cases, I assume that you already have the Arduino IDE installed and working on your computer. And if you don't, then you can go to arduino.cc under software downloads. You will see this page and just download the installer file and install it. Once you have this done and you've got your Arduino IDE running, the next thing to do is to go to GitHub, and on GitHub at this location here, especially if Arduino ESP32, you'll see the repository that holds all the support files that makes it possible to use the ESP32 on Arduino IDE. So we need to copy these files into our Arduino IDE folders. There's a few ways by which you can do that, but by far the easiest is to do it via the boards manager. And this feature works across platforms, so it's the same thing that you do whether you're using the Mac or Windows or Linux, and that's how I'm going to do it as well in this lecture. So click on the instructions for boards manager link. Will take you to this page here, which contains the instructions that we need. The first thing to do is to copy this URL, which points to a JSON file with instructions for the boards manager to know which files to get, where to get them from, and where to store them locally. So I'm going to copy this URL, then go under Arduino Preferences and paste that right here. So I already have it done, so click OK, and with that we can go under Tools, Board and Boards Manager, and because of the URL that's pointing to the JSON file that I just added in the preferences, I can now go and search for ESP32. That will bring up the only option available. Double check that I've got the latest repository and click on Install. So that's about 120 megabytes of data that the boards manager will need to download and install. So I'm going to give it a bit of time and fast forward this part of the lecture and come back once the installation is complete. Great, so the support for the ESP32 is installed. Let's check it out. So let's click on the Tools menu, and under Board you can see that we now have support for a lot of ESP32 boards. So a very large variety. The one that we'll be using in this course is the stock standard ESP32 dev module. So I can select it here, and that will bring up all the configuration for this particular board, and you can see it listed here as well. So all of these options are correct. We don't have to change anything here. Those correspond exactly to the stock standard ESP32 dev module that I'll be using. Another thing that we can look at is this. Go into File and Examples, and then down here at the bottom of the Examples window, or drop down I should say, are a lot of examples for the ESP32. And many of those we'll be playing with in later sections as we are starting to explore and discover the capabilities of the ESP32. Another thing is back under Tools, the Ports menu right now, I don't have my ESP32 connected, so it's not showing up. But beginning with the next section, you'll be able to see your ESP32 listed here, just like it happens with any other normal Arduino, or regular Arduino, I should say. And the last thing is I want to show you where the packages, or where the data that provide the ESP32 support, the files that make up this support, are stored. So in my case, if I go to the preferences again, you'll see here there's a path specified under your user folder, library, Arduino 15, and that at this location, which we are right here in the Finder, you'll see packages. And below packages, you can see all the files that make up the ESP32 support. So that's what it all goes, if you're wondering. One thing before we go to the next lecture is to just make a brief mention of the alternative integrated development environment that we can use with the ESP32, which is actually one of many. But one very popular such platform outside of the Arduino IDE is Platform.io IDE. This is very, very popular among programmers of any kind, not specifically Arduino programmers. It's a general purpose integrated development environment with some really awesome features, and it's worth looking at. I'm going to be using Platform.io IDE for the ESP32 in the next course that I'm designing at the moment. It's going to be a follow-up course to the present course, which is for beginners, for people new to the ESP32. So for the intermediate level ESP32 makers, we'll be using Platform.io IDE instead of the Arduino IDE, and that will unlock a few not necessarily complicated but definitely powerful features that we can make use of. Okay, and with this said, if you want to know how to install ESP32 support on Windows, check out the next lecture. Otherwise, you can skip it and move on to the next section, where we'll start doing some experimentation with the ESP32 and beginning to explore the GPIO capabilities.